name's Kevin Evans and welcome to Code to Cloud. In this episode, I think we're on episode 3, we're going to be talking about technical skills, right, for your cloud career roadmap, right? And what I've learned from my industry experience in tech, you need to either become a platform engineer, cloud engineer, DevOps engineer, whatever you want to call it, and the technical skills that, are required for the role. But before we kick off with all that, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Packet Publishing. They were very kind enough, and we're running a competition at the moment. We're handing out a free ebook for Azure Architecture Explained. There'll be details in the show notes or in the comments below about how you can enter that competition, and a winner should be picked on January 31st. So stay tuned for more information on that. There should be also a picture of the cover of the book somewhere on the screen. So let's get down to business. So, episode 3, technical skills. As always, we're going to use the whiteboard. We're going to move from left to right, and we're going to break down the sections. So what tech skills do I need? Well, when I started off in tech, it was building PCs, fixing printers, right? Basic networking, right? That kind of thing. When it comes to cloud, different lens on it now, right? So the typical infrastructure person is more of a programmer these days. They need to think in a programmatical way because we deploy stuff as infrastructure as a code. We use cloud native approaches. We may use DevOps practices that actually feed back into our platform engineering approach. So let's move from left to right. Let's start off with deployment, config, methods, and tools. So ClickOps. So when we talk about cloud solution providers, such as Azure, CSPs, the easiest way to get started is by deploying infrastructure in the portal. A bit like when you use your desktop, you'll use a GUI, graphical user interface, and this is a way to deploy services and infrastructure resources within inside of Azure, right? So hence the name ClickOps, because you use your mouse. Click, click. Then if we think about the developer lens, right, that we need to apply to our role, then we need something to develop our code in. And you need something called an IDE, and VS Code is probably the most popular one out there right now. Again, it's developed by Microsoft, very powerful tool, free. It's basically a text editor, right, for different programming languages. But I pretty much use this on a daily basis to deploy my infrastructure as a code resources, right? Or if I'm doing stuff with Kubernetes, or if I'm writing pipelines. So let's get onto that a little bit more. So infrastructure as a code is a way of deploying infrastructure services or resources in Azure in a programmatical fashion. Now, I've picked the most two popular ones, right, for you to focus on. So we've got Terraform and we've got Bicep. So Terraform's been around for a considerable amount of time. It's very dominant in the market. It's the one I started off with first, and it's very powerful, and there's lots of learning resources on it. It's a very mature tooling set, and it's made by a company called HashiCorp. Now, there is a open source version called opentofu that's, I think it's just gone GA by the time of this recording. And that's something to look at as well. I think we're going to be doing an episode on opentofu shortly as well. And then we've got Bicep. So Bicep is a domain-specific language, and it was built for Azure, pretty much. It's developed by Microsoft. It's open source again. There's pros and cons to each of these toolings, or each of these infrastructure as a code types. So I could do a whole episode on the pros and cons. It's like the eternal battle. But to be quite honest, the way I would look at it is pick which one's easy for you, which one you like to use. I feel like Bicep is very powerful with Azure. It's built for Azure, and I've started seeing things now where we're using it in platform engineering tools such as Radius to even deploy resources on-premise. And what I mean by on-premise is a hybrid approach. So we've got the public cloud, and then we've got resources that are physical, right, inside our data centers, or if you're like me, on my home lab. But again, lots of love for Terraform. I'm certified in Terraform as well. So you should go and check that out. And then we've got stuff like config scripting. So bash, born again shell. It's in every Linux operating system pretty much. Unix, it's in Mac OS. It's even in Windows now for Windows subsystem for Linux. PowerShell came out the Windows ecosystem. You can configure Azure with PowerShell. You can configure virtual machines. Same again with Bash. You can configure Linux-based machines. Very powerful tools, CLI tools, command line interface tools. And then there's YAML, which is yet another markup language, right? Funny name, I know. Something that you should get familiar with. It's used in all sorts of things. Very agnostic. From anything from cloud-native tooling, such as Kubernetes, to pipelines in GitHub and Azure DevOps. It's mainly used for configuring, right, step-by-step processes to be carried out in an automated fashion. So, you would build a YAML pipeline template to push out some Terraform code, that kind of thing. And then we've got Git. So Git is a technology that helps us commit and basically keep a version history of our code commits, right, to our repos. Again, this is something that gets overlooked quite a lot. When I started off with Git, it was expected that I knew how to use it and what it was. A bit like Word and Office, right? That's not the case. So getting up to speed with Git, getting your first comment, pushing your first piece of code to your repo, and I talk about, GitHub, right? It's free to sign up. Get yourself a repo up there. Get Git installed on your local machine. Fire up VS Code and create your first Markdown language template, right? Or README file. You can see the process of pushing and pulling your code from a repo. And then, there's advanced stages to that around, rebasing and getting yourself out of a bit of a mess, right? We've all made those commits that have blown away a piece of infrastructure or damaged something. The great thing about Git is that you can go back through the version history, and there's a whole command line interface around Git as well. And then the CI/CD. So CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous deployment. GitHub, right? GitHub Actions, GitHub repos, using automation tools to then work around your infrastructure as a code, or use your config scripting to push out changes against your infrastructure or resources in Azure. So go and check that out. I'm going to put as many free links to free resources within the show notes, so hopefully it should get you up and running with this. I am going to do future episodes on some of these technologies. So I did one on, we're doing a platform engineering series at the moment, which it pretty much encompasses all of this technology that I just talked about previously. And then we're going to move on to operating systems. And this is a biggie. It's overlooked. There's two operating systems you need to focus on. Windows, particularly Windows Server, and Linux. I'd say more Linux these days. Understanding both of these operating systems and how they work, how the command lines work, how you interact with them, how you deploy them in an enterprise environment, how the kernels work in both of them, how the security is applied, how to optimize them in the right way, or just having a general feel, right, of how to basically navigate your way around an operating system, either via the GUI or via the CLI, is going to open doors for you, right, when it comes to the other pieces of technology that we've talked about. You need to get really comfortable with operating systems because they're the underlying APIs and software, right, which power everything else. You can download any flavor of Linux off the internet for free. I would suggest that you start off with Ubuntu or Fedora, or you could run it inside of Windows, right? Windows subsystem for Linux. So you get the best of both worlds. Then we're going to talk about infrastructure. Now, this could have been a very exhaustive topic, infrastructure by itself. There's a lot of services in Azure, right? So I've touched on some of the things that I think you should concentrate on, which you should focus on. We've got infrastructure as a service, so virtual machines. Basically the bread and butter. We used to virtualize virtual machines on premise using ESXi or Hyper-V. And then we worked, before that it was bare metal. right? So we used to have a server for a particular job with an operating system deployed on it directly. Virtual machines came along, and what it meant was we could have a physical server, and then we could aggregate and we could scale multiple servers or multiple virtual machines on that one physical server, which means we got more bang for our buck, right? Same in Azure. Deploy virtual machines. They could be Windows, they could be Linux, right? Whatever the type may be. And getting to grips with that will give you a great foundation of how it works in Azure. You'll learn stuff like, we'll get onto connectivity, virtual networks, network security groups, potentially if you want to scale it up, Azure firewalls, right? Network routing, all the bits and pieces that actually underpin and set up the foundations for a virtual machine to run. Lots of tangible options there once you've got one deployed. And then we've got connectivity. This one is a bit of a rabbit hole. And I've summed it up in one line, but it's a lot bigger than it's actually written down. It's always been an enigma, but if you know networking, it's really going to give you an edge. It really is. It's difficult sometimes to understand networking, how to visualize it in your head, especially today when we do software-defined networking. Whereas when I started off in my career, it was we made the cables, we racked the switches and the routers, we deployed the firewalls, and then we actually physically plugged the cables in. So we did physical cable management, put them in a rack, that kind of thing. And then we did configure each appliance, right? For whatever the scenario was. So understanding how virtual networks work, ingress and egress. So how does traffic come into my environment and how does traffic come out of my environment? How do we do that in a secure way? Do I need a firewall? Do I need a web application firewall? What kind of traffic am I routing out, right? Is it layer 7? This kind of thing. Then there's storage. So understanding how storage accounts work. Storage accounts are very versatile, right? They can be used for backups. They could be used for data lakes. They could be used for dumping unstructured data in there. But how do we secure it, right? We don't want that bleeding data across the internet, right? So understanding how a storage account works. Again, it goes down to virtual hard disks, right, that are attached to virtual machines. So really understanding your storage, how to make that high availability or the performance types, that kind of thing, is something that you should look into. And then there's container services. So stuff like Azure Kubernetes service, right? There are different ones out in the market. There's different ways. You could even deploy your own bare metal version of Kubernetes if you wanted that kind of pain in your life. But starting off with something like AKS, connecting to the cluster, understanding how it works, seeing how the control plane works, and seeing how the node pools work. Again, if you want to go down that cloud native route, and I've got to be honest, I do think that container services are the default now. Used to be virtual machines, but there's been a lot of drive and a lot of push to move over to a open source / cloud native architecture, and container services are very prominent when it comes to that. And then we've got stuff like platform as a service. So stuff like Azure SQL, Cosmos DB, right? For the data people in the room. We create web apps, we create different kinds of architecture, but we ultimately needed a database, right? To do lookups on, right? And where that data is going to reside. So understanding the basic types that we've got available in Azure, and again, comes back down to, what's right for the job, what's required for the workload in particular, but understanding a basic flavor of database technologies, and platform as a service technologies is really going to help you out. And then this one is something that you'll learn to love, right? and I'm not putting any shade, right, on identity, but it's really important. You've got Microsoft Entra, which used to be called Azure AD. Identity underpins everything in Azure. It's our boundary, it's our security gateway, it's where we secure all our role-based access controls, how we add users, how we remove users, how we give people the right amount of access to resources in Azure. And that's not just logging onto a server. That could be the pipelines that we use to deploy our infrastructure. That could be the way that we use the command line interface to configure our infrastructure. So really getting a grip on Microsoft Entra and how that works, it's so fundamental. It's so underrated. So having a basic grasp on identity is just going to help you deploy better environments, better configurations, and better workloads. Now, I came from a Windows AD background, so I've been working with Active Directory for 15 years, probably more. Azure AD or Microsoft Entra is a completely different beast. It's a cloud native identity service for cloud native services in Azure, right? So very powerful, and it's something that you should really look into. So then we got the next one, security. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So we've got stuff like Azure Policy. Azure Policy is the governance engine inside of Azure. It works with management groups. It works with subscriptions. You apply it to the resources that you have deployed in Azure. And there's different ways of deploying it. We have a whole section and documentation around Azure landing zones, which help you get up and started for this to basically better manage your infrastructure. But, imagine if you're in Europe, right, and you need GDPR apply to your environment, right, to make it compliant. And how do I report back on that? How do the security folks or the compliance folks get that information to see how healthy they are, right, from a rating point of view? So Azure Policy, it automates this stuff as well. So you implement controls or best practices, and it doesn't matter which way you try to deploy services in Azure, it's there, overseeing everything, making sure that the right rules and procedures and guardrails are in place. And then we've got Defender for Cloud. So a lot of folks think when they think Defender for Cloud, they think antivirus, right? Or an agent that runs on a VM. It's so much more than that. Again, it's more about the security posture of your environment. How do I report back on this? How do I remediate certain security tasks? What does my identity look like from a healthy point of view? And it actually gives you weighted best practices to improve your Azure environment. So getting a grip on Defender for Cloud, it's a whole range of products, right? It's got a lot easier in recent years. We've basically singled the dashboards down inside of Azure to make it easier, but it makes you more effective of your job because it's hard enough as it is. But understanding all the tools and levers that you've got at your disposal will help you build and secure your Azure environment in a better way. And then we've got security for DevOps, which scans things like infrastructure as a code misconfigurations, the wrong secrets being used, right? Which ties back to Azure, Azure AD, Microsoft Entra, right? How does it look like from are we deploying our infrastructure as a code in the right way? Am I configuring my resources in the right way before they're even deployed? So we did a lot of, we'll deploy something, we'll let the tools analyze it, and then we'll remediate it. Now imagine if we shifted left all the way back to the beginning of this, and we had our infrastructure as a code, and we were able to pick up security misconfigurations before it even happened, right? We've already prevented the problem from happening in the first place. So it could be stuff like container images using old versions of software, right, with deprecated versions or vulnerabilities that are involved, right? Using security for DevOps, it's just going to become one of those things that you will remediate and implement before you even deploy a resource in the future. And then I bring up Microsoft Entra again. It does identity, but it does security as well, right? Like, again, it's our security boundary. Just as much as the network layer used to be our security boundary back in the day, identity is our security boundary. So stuff like privileged identity management, right? So imagine logging in, you're a standard user, and then you're able to elevate your access for a set period of time by logging it, putting a request in, and then once you've finished your work or the time period ends, it lowers your access back down. I mean, that stops bad actors from, if they get access to your account, logging in and causing damage, right, and getting up to mischief. Same for conditional access. Maybe, you have a company that's on the island of Fiji, and no one else is going to log in outside the island of Fiji. Well, you can use conditional access to block access from the outside the island of Fiji, for example. Or, people have to have MFA. You should all have MFA enabled. But people should have MFA, multi-factor authentication, enabled. Or their machine needs to be compliant in the right way. It's really powerful. And it stops a lot of the bad stuff from getting in just by setting up the accounts in the right way and people having access to the right amount of resources. So security is a lot deeper in this, but I thought I'd just give you a general flavor of where you could get started and what you should look into when it comes to Azure. And then we've got problem solving. Now, problem solving is something that is more experience based. You need to learn how to troubleshoot stuff, and you'll get better with it over time, right? So understanding basic things, or when you get blocked network access, or you don't have permissions to the right thing, or you've got the wrong secrets, having those problem solving skills is going to help you. And problem solving really comes down to, how do I get access to information to help me to unblock this technical issue? Now, when I started off in tech, it was my colleagues, right? It was the more senior people around me I could go to. And you can still do that now, but a lot of us work from home. Fire up a search engine, try and Google error messages, look on forums, that kind of thing. YouTube channels, I do it all the time. If I'm stuck on something, I'm Googling it, right? Or I'm using Bing or whatever. Same again, right? If you run into a problem, raise a GitHub issue. The amount of companies and tools and organizations that use GitHub to manage their central repositories for their products and services is really far reaching. So like, I did it yesterday. I had a problem with something that I was doing with my home lab, and I raised a GitHub issue to ask a question. One, it got me, if you think about it, if I'd never done it before, it gave me the experience of raising an actual issue, right, against a repo in Git on GitHub. And two, it got me interacting with the community. And when we talked about that in the previous episode about soft skills and expanding your network, it's a great place. And you'll always find that people reply or give you a piece of advice or a nugget of information to help you with that. So GitHub issues, right? It could be anything. You could end up actually helping to rewrite documentation, or, if you've got the technical skills, helping to modify that service or product in a way that serves better for everybody else. You may find an issue that no one else has ever came across before and help resolve that. Ticketing systems, right? ServiceNow is a very popular one. There's lots of them out there. I've worked in all sorts of environments over the years. I've had companies that have built their own, to well-known off the market, off the shelf market, in the market tool sets. But yeah, getting used to how ticketing systems work, where to go and ask for help, that kind of thing. And there's a ticketing system built into Azure, right, to ask for support to raise support requests. So understanding how that works. But yeah, online research is probably the biggest one. Search engines are your friend. Forums are your friend. Reddit's your friend sometimes. YouTube, that kind of thing, right? If you've ran into it, 9 times out of 10, someone else has already ran into it, right? So you can go and find that information online. But don't forget to ask your support network, your colleagues next to you. If you're early in career, that's why it helps to be in the office a little bit more. Working from home sometimes can be difficult because you don't know where to go and ask those questions. So try and think about how you can set yourself up for success as well. And then we've got learning paths. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. I'll split them up. So there's the classroom way. Go and get a degree in computer science, cybersecurity, data science, whatever your favorite flavor is. Attend a college or university. Or you could, you'll get a lot of support. It's very directed. It's very laid out in a certain way. And that's great for people that are starting out. And then there's boot camps as well. There's a lot of technical organizations out there that run boot camps, and they can be online or in person, and they have lab equipment, that kind of thing, where you turn up and you learn a specific piece of technology. So check out for boot camps as well. And then there's self-taught. Now, I started off with the classroom, and then when I got into my career, everything's been self-taught. So on the job experience, I know we've talked about how difficult that might be, getting that first job, but on the job experience, right, opens your mind up to new ways or new scenarios for you to go and try out. Again, I told you about experience. You can't buy it. You have to earn it. You can't bottle it up, right? It's something that just happens with time. Every day is a learning. It's a school day, right? Setting up labs. That could be, VirtualBox or Hyper-V or whatever, or a virtual machine in Azure, setting up a lab, right? Going through the process of deploying a certain type of architecture to understand the pieces and the requirements for building out that workload. So labs are really important. I'm a hands-on learner, so actually getting my hands on the tech and physically going through that pain really helps me out. Reading stuff like blogs. Community members out there, they write some awesome blogs, something that they're trying out new, something that you've never come across before. Again, wealth of information, and it's all free. So check out blogs. GitHub projects as well, right? I've talked about GitHub a lot, but understanding what projects you could get involved with. They could be open source projects. And again, it could be something like the documentation needs touching up, or the way that the repo is structured. Whatever it is, you could get involved and help with that, right? Or if your technical skills develop more over time, or if you've already got those technical skills, you can get involved with those projects, right, and make an impact. And then there's vlogs. Vlogs are short, for YouTube videos. So, there's a YouTube video for everything. You're watching one now. I watch YouTube videos all the time, for stuff like, stuff around the house, or, stuff to fix my car. But again, it applies to the IT world as well, right? Watching someone else do it sometimes is a eureka moment. And then there's something called applied skills. So if we just want to bring up let me just do this. So applied skills recently came out. Now, so applied skills. So I've talked about, and I just posted something out on LinkedIn about this. So MS Learn has learning paths, and we'll talk about that in the next episode for certifications. But we've come up with actual practical ways now at Microsoft Learn around how do I actually get a lab environment and actually go through the practicalities of getting experience and then showcasing it to the world. Well, Microsoft Applied Skills does that. It's another way of practically getting that experience. And I'm just trying to find down here, but there's a lab assessment. Now, if you go here, it brings you here, and let's take a look. This is the MS Learn website, and this is where all the paths are. This is all free resources, by the way. Different modules for different career paths. But if we just look on roles, I always go by roles. You can go by product, but if we click on Azure, but then if we scroll down here, let's have a look. What have we got? Let's click on DevOps Engineer. And then let's see if we've got any courses. Do you know what? That's not working right. Here's one, for example. You go. Here's one, for example. Deploy container services by using Azure Kubernetes service. So this is an applied skill. It tells you the level that you need to be. So this one's intermediate. So probably try and start off with something a bit more basic if you haven't got the experience. You can actually prepare for the assessment by going through the learning path, and it tells you how long it's going to take. And this is free, by the way. And then, it tells you the kind of role that you're expected. So cloud administrator, right? Cloud engineer, right? We talked about this. Don't worry about the job title. Just absorb the knowledge. So, and then the subjects. But then the candidate for this credential must have experience with Azure administration, with deploying resources in Azure. They should also have a basic understanding of Azure policy, Kubernetes, and AKS concepts, including Docker and kubectl commands. So even if you don't know that stuff, at least you know what you need to go away and learn before you do this. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So just figuring out what interests you, we talked about this before, and then understanding where to go and get these kind of resources. Applied skills, I think, is fantastic, by the way. It's a great way of actually getting hands-on experience for free. And then you can actually, once you complete this, publish the badge on LinkedIn, which we talked about in the last episode, showing your achievements, and then it drums up conversations, right, and expands your network and develops your community. So then that leads me to the next episode, which we'll talk about next week. And we have certifications. So in episode 4, we'll talk about certifications, and I'll talk about the ones that I feel that you need for Azure. There are quite a few certification paths now, but giving you that broad scope, knowing where to start, can actually help you figure out where you're going to go next. So if you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments. I've been loving the feedback so far. Again, look me up on LinkedIn, on X, follow me. I'm always there if you want to have a conversation or understand what's happening next. But for this week, bye for now.
Yeah.